The golden age of Hollywood shines in our memory as a flawless black and white dream. But this glorious image is a masterful illusion. Stars with short tempers, drug issues, and even violent tendencies. These weren't just isolated incidents. They were the dark secrets of Hollywood's most beloved icons, and tonight, we're exposing them all. Number 10. Joan Crawford. Coming in at number 10 is the definitive movie star, Joan Crawford, the epitome of steely ambition and manufactured glamour. She was the star of classics like Mildred Pierce, famous for playing determined women who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. This persona was born from her own life, as she clawed her way from a desperate, impoverished childhood to become Hollywood royalty. To the public, she was the ultimate professional, a titan of the silver screen whose work ethic was legendary. But for those who worked with her, that legendary focus had a much, much darker side. Crawford's obsession with perfection manifested as a terrifying form of control that she inflicted on everyone around her. Her homes were famously encased in plastic slipcovers, not just for cleanliness, but as a symbol of her iron grip on her environment. On set, she was a tyrant in Dior, terrorizing crews with demands that went far beyond simple professionalism, her rampant germophobia making everyday interactions a nightmare. This wasn't just the fussiness of a diva. The question that haunted Hollywood was whether her behavior was born from deep-seated psychological torment or from cold, calculated malice. To those on the receiving end, the distinction didn't matter. It felt like a cruelty designed to keep everyone off balance and subservient to her will. She demanded perfection, but delivered fear. This venom was most famously directed at her co-star Bette Davis during the filming of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. Crawford, knowing Davis suffered from back problems, allegedly filled her pockets with rocks or wore a lead-lined belt for a scene where Davis had to drag her, causing her genuine injury. When Davis was nominated for an Oscar for the film, a snubbed Crawford launched a vicious smear campaign against her. She then spitefully arranged to accept the award on behalf of the absent winner, Anne Bancroft, purely to steal the spotlight from a defeated Davis on national television. Ultimately, Joan Crawford built an immortal career on a foundation of discipline, but it was a discipline enforced with an iron fist. Her obsessive need for control and her capacity for cold, calculated cruelty alienated her from almost everyone she worked with. While the camera loved her, the people behind it often despised her, making her a perfect example of a star whose public adoration was matched only by private animosity. But it takes two to wage a war, and Crawford's nemesis was more than happy to return fire with her own brand of terror. Number 9. Bette Davis. And that brings us to number 9, the one and only Bette Davis. Unlike Crawford, Davis was never a conventional glamour queen. She was a fighter. A warrior of an actress who was respected for her immense talent and her defiant, mesmerizing eyes. She was famous for battling studio heads and refusing to be molded into a generic starlet, earning a reputation as a fierce and independent woman. The public loved her for her grit and her powerful, unconventional performances. Her peers, however, often found her impossible to endure. Bette Davis's trademark brutal honesty was frequently just a license for breathtaking cruelty. She possessed an acidic tongue and a complete absence of a filter, and she seemed to take genuine pleasure in verbally eviscerating anyone she felt was unprofessional or untalented. Co-stars, directors, and even powerful studio bosses were not immune to her tirades, which were legendary for their ferocity. Many who worked with her learned to simply stay out of her way, as her moods could curdle the atmosphere on any set. She wasn't just difficult, she was intimidating. In her war with Joan Crawford, Davis was a diabolical strategist in her own right. During the filming of Baby Jane, knowing Crawford's husband was the chairman of Pepsi, Davis had a Coca-Cola machine installed in her dressing room just to infuriate her rival. For a scene in which her character attacks Crawford's, Davis allegedly made physical contact, a slight kick to the head that Crawford claimed required stitches. This wasn't just method acting, it was a personal vendetta played out for the cameras. There is no denying Bette Davis's monumental talent, which earned her the grudging respect of the entire industry. However, that respect rarely blossomed into affection, as her confrontational and aggressive nature left a trail of bruised egos in her wake. She was a brilliant artist who fought tooth and nail for her craft, but she was also a deeply difficult woman who seemed to thrive on conflict. In the Battle of the Divas, there were no real winners, only scorched earth. Number 8. Frank Sinatra. At number 8, we have the chairman of the board himself, Frank Sinatra. With a voice as smooth as velvet and the swagger of a king, Old Blue Eyes was the undisputed definition of cool for an entire generation. As the leader of the legendary Rat Pack, he represented a life of effortless charm, talent, and carefree camaraderie. He was the man every man wanted to be and every woman wanted to be with. But beneath that cool exterior was a notoriously short fuse and a capacity for pure menace. Sinatra was infamous for a volcanic, hair-trigger temper that could erupt without warning. Stories are legion of him verbally abusing waiters, destroying hotel rooms, and launching into terrifying tirades against anyone who showed him the slightest disrespect. His mood swings were the stuff of Hollywood legend, capable of turning a festive party into a tense, frightening ordeal in a matter of seconds. His friends were treated like royalty, but his enemies were subjected to a wrath that could be genuinely terrifying. Much of Sinatra's power stemmed from his widely reported and lifelong associations with major figures in organized crime. These shadowy connections were an open secret in Hollywood and affording him a level of influence and intimidation that few could match. He allegedly used this power to bully studio heads, threaten romantic rivals, and ruin the careers of those who crossed him. Comedian Shecky Greene famously joked about Sinatra saving his life, only to clarify that it was Sinatra's own men who were beating him up at the time. With Frank Sinatra, loyalty was everything, and there was absolutely no room for dissent. You were either a beloved member of his inner circle, or you were a pariah, an enemy to be publicly humiliated and professionally destroyed. His magnetic charm was undeniable, but it was a package deal that came with his terrifying temper and dangerous grudges. This made him one of the most powerful and widely feared men in the history of entertainment. Number 7. Number 7 is one of Hollywood's most beloved and tragic figures, Judy Garland. From her star-making turn in The Wizard of Oz, she was America's sweetheart, a pint-sized performer with a planet-sized voice that could break your heart. She was a symbol of incredible talent mixed with a raw, accessible vulnerability that made audiences feel fiercely protective of her. But the same demons that made her performances so heartbreakingly real also made her a professional nightmare. The immense pressures of stardom from a young age led to a lifelong battle with addiction and crippling self-doubt. Professionally, this translated into chronic, maddening unreliability. She would show up on set hours late, or not at all, often unprepared and emotionally volatile. Her on-set meltdowns and inability to perform cost studios staggering amounts of time and money, turning any production she was in into a high-stakes gamble. This behavior came to a head in 1950 when she was cast as a lead in the blockbuster musical Annie Get Your Gun. After countless delays, emotional breakdowns, and days where she was simply unable to work, MGM made a shocking decision. They fired Judy Garland, their biggest musical star, from the film, replacing her with Betty Hutton. The public firing was a devastating blow that branded her as uninsurable. And while she would mount a legendary, Oscar-nominated comeback a few years later with A Star is Born, her time as Hollywood's reliable golden goose was gone forever. The story of Judy Garland is one of profound tragedy, and many in the industry deeply sympathized with the pain of a woman chewed up by the studio system. However, that sympathy rarely extended to the producers and directors whose budgets she destroyed and whose patience she exhausted. She was a victim of Hollywood, but she also created victims of her own instability, making her one of the most tragically difficult stars of her era. Number 6. Charlie Chaplin. At number 6 is an icon so universal, he barely needs an introduction. Charlie Chaplin. As his creation, The Little Tramp, he was arguably the most famous man on the planet, a comedic genius who could evoke laughter and tears from a global audience. The Tramp was a symbol of resilience, kindness, and the plight of the common man. The man who played him, however, was reportedly anything but kind. Behind the camera, Chaplin was an absolute tyrant and a cold-hearted perfectionist. He would demand hundreds of takes for a single scene, pushing his actors to the point of physical and psychological collapse. During the filming of City Lights, he notoriously tormented his co-star Virginia Cheryl, who he felt wasn't a real actress, firing her and rehiring her as a cruel power play. His relentless demands and lack of empathy left many of his collaborators feeling more terrorized than inspired. Adding to his difficult nature was Chaplin's legendary stinginess. Despite being one of the wealthiest men in the world, he was famously and comically cheap. He would reportedly haggle over every expense and was known for underpaying his loyal, long-suffering crew and employees. This miserly behavior stood in stark, almost insulting contrast to the generous and gentle spirit of the beloved little tramp he presented to the world. The chasm between Charlie Chaplin's public persona and his private behavior was immense. The world adored the little tramp, but the actors and crew who worked directly with the man himself often saw a cold, demanding, and miserly megalomaniac. His artistic genius was undisputed, but it was a genius fueled by a tyrannical control that left many who worked for him feeling bitter and exploited. Number 5. Errol Flynn. Sliding in at number 5 is the definitive swashbuckler, Errol Flynn. Handsome, athletic, and brimming with a devil-may-care charisma, he was the hero of Hollywood's greatest adventure films like The Adventures of Robin Hood and Captain Blood. To the public in the 1930s and 40s, he wasn't just an actor playing a hero. He was the hero. His off-screen life of adventure and romance was as legendary as any film he starred in, but that lifestyle created chaos on set. Flynn's hedonistic lifestyle was a constant source of frustration for his directors, especially his frequent collaborator Michael Curtiz, with whom he famously clashed. He was known for his heavy drinking, both on and off the set, and his elaborate, often cruel, practical jokes that would disrupt filming for hours. His utter lack of discipline and his belief that the rules didn't apply to him drove studio heads mad, as they were constantly trying to manage the fallout from his behavior. The popular phrase, "in like Flynn," came to mean an easy success, but it also reflected his uncanny ability to get away with truly outrageous behavior. He was known for his public brawling and a complete disregard for any form of authority, from directors to law enforcement. He saw life as one big party, and his film sets were merely the backdrop. This made him a constant, unpredictable liability for any production he was a part of. While Errol Flynn's roguish charm was potent enough to make him a massive international star, it eventually began to wear thin with his colleagues. Co-stars and crew grew wary of the endless pranks, the unprofessionalism, and the general chaos that always surrounded him. His career proves that even the most dashing and beloved hero can become a pariah when their off-screen antics make them impossible to work with. Number 4. Marlon Brando. Our number 4 spot goes to the man who changed acting forever, Marlon Brando. With his raw, mumbling, and emotionally explosive style in films like A Streetcar Named Desire, he shattered the old mold of the polished Hollywood actor. He was a revolutionary, a rebel with a cause, whose genius was so immense it could not be denied. In the 1950s, he was the brooding, brilliant face of a new kind of stardom. But his genius was wrapped in a profound contempt for the industry that made him famous. Even as a young star, Brando was notoriously difficult, moody, and confrontational. He treated the Hollywood system with open disdain, seeing acting as a silly profession and interviews as a joke. He was known for his on-set pranks, his passive-aggressive refusal to cooperate, and for deliberately undermining the authority of directors he did not respect. This wasn't just artistic temperament, it was the beginning of a pattern of professional disruption. Brando's difficult behavior reached its zenith during the disastrous 1962 production of Mutiny on the Bounty. His ego, now fully unleashed, led him to demand absurd script changes, attempt to direct some scenes himself, and indulge in bizarre, petulant behavior that caused the budget to skyrocket. The production became a legendary Hollywood catastrophe, nearly bankrupting the studio and cementing Brando's reputation as being dangerously uncontrollable. After Mutiny on the Bounty, the perception of Marlon Brando shifted permanently. He was no longer just a difficult genius, he was a professional monster, an artist whose immense talent was held hostage by his own ego and contempt for his work. It was a reputation for being impossible that would follow him, and which he would even cultivate for the rest of his legendary and controversial career. Number 3. Alfred Hitchcock. At number 3, we have a man who was not an actor, but a director whose personal brand was more famous than most movie stars, Alfred Hitchcock. With his iconic silhouette and droll, macabre sense of humor, he presented himself as the charming master of suspense. He was a household name who invited audiences into his thrilling and terrifying cinematic worlds. For many of the actors in those worlds, however, the terror was all too real. Hitchcock achieved his signature suspense through relentless psychological warfare on his actors. He famously and cruelly stated that actors are cattle, and he often treated them as such, viewing them as props to be manipulated for the camera. He took a particular sadistic pleasure in controlling his leading ladies, the so-called Hitchcock blondes, subjecting them to the whims of his mind games to elicit the panic reactions he desired. His cruelty reached its peak in his treatment of Tippi Hedren during the filming of The Birds. In one of the film's most famous scenes, Hitchcock, who had become personally obsessed with her, subjected Hedren to 5 straight days of having live, frantic birds physically thrown at and tied to her. The ordeal left her physically scratched and bleeding, and so emotionally traumatized that she suffered a complete breakdown. It was a week of calculated torture in the name of realism. Alfred Hitchcock was undeniably a cinematic genius, but his art was often born from a place of dark, manipulative cruelty. He wasn't just a master at directing suspenseful stories. He was a master at creating genuine terror and psychological distress for his actors behind the scenes. Many who worked with him feared him, seeing him not as a charming maestro, but as a cold and calculating puppet master. Number 2. Mae West. Our runner-up for Hollywood's most despised star is the one and only Mae West. She was a cultural phenomenon, a trailblazing writer and performer who built an empire on audacious sexual humor and scandalous double entendres. In an era of strict censorship, she was a symbol of female power, wit, and liberation who controlled her own career with an iron fist. But woe to any actor who thought they would be her equal on screen. Mae West's on-screen persona was backed by one of the most powerful and ruthless egos in Hollywood history. She demanded complete creative control over her films and would meticulously rewrite every script to ensure she got every single funny line and memorable moment. Her co-stars, even famous leading men, were often reduced to being human props, existing only to set up her next singer or gaze at her adoringly. A prime example was her treatment of a handsome up-and-coming actor in her film I'm No Angel, Cary Grant. West effectively treated the future superstar as set dressing, giving him almost no memorable lines or actions. He was simply the tall, handsome man she could lean against while she held court. It was a pattern she repeated throughout her career, steamrolling anyone who might dare to pull focus from her for even a moment. To collaborate with Mae West was not to partner, it was to surrender. She was the star, the writer, and the undisputed center of her own universe, and her films were showcases built for one. While the public adored her audacity, many in the industry saw her as a professional vampire, draining the life from every scene to ensure all eyes remained on her. Her trailblazing power came at a steep price, paid by every co-star who had to accept the on-screen submission as a condition of the employment. Number 1. Jerry Lewis. And finally, at number 1, we have the man who was more than a star. He was a national institution, the king of comedy himself, Jerry Lewis. With his manic, childlike energy, he was the beloved goofball who conquered film, television, and stage. For decades, his annual Muscular Dystrophy Association telethons cemented his image as a tireless humanitarian, a real-life hero who used his immense fame for good. But the saintly, hilarious image presented to the public was a masterful illusion, hiding a man described by countless colleagues as one of the most tyrannical and cruel bullies in the history of entertainment. Behind the scenes, Jerry Lewis's need for control was absolute and his temper legendary. He was a notorious perfectionist, but unlike Chaplin's quest for artistic genius, Lewis's was fueled by a bottomless and brutal ego. Cast, crew, and even his famous partner, Dean Martin, were subjected to ferocious verbal abuse and psychological games. He was known to publicly humiliate employees for the slightest perceived error and fire loyal staff on a whim. To work with Jerry Lewis was to walk on eggshells, knowing that the lovable clown could transform into a vicious monster in a split second. Lewis's cruelty stemmed from a staggering god complex. He saw himself as the sole genius behind the Martin and Lewis duo, viewing Dean Martin as a handsome but disposable accessory, a grudge that festered until their bitter breakup. As a director, he was an undisputed innovator, but he used his power to terrorize his sets. Even his celebrated humanitarian work was reportedly a vehicle for his ego. Stories persisted for years that the man who cried for suffering children on camera was just as demanding and merciless to the people working behind the scenes of his own telethon. What places Jerry Lewis at the top of our list is the breathtaking Hypocrisy. No star worked harder to build a public persona of childlike warmth and selfless charity while privately engaging in such consistent, deep-seated cruelty. The beloved funny man was a mask for a bitter, controlling egomaniac who seemed to take pleasure in intimidating those around him. While other stars on this list were difficult, Jerry Lewis's dark side was a total inversion of his public identity, making him the ultimate wolf in clown's clothing, and our #1 most secretly despised star of the Golden Age. So there you have it, a journey behind the silver screen's flawless facade. From the venomous feud between Joan Crawford and Bette Davis to the tyrannical genius of Charlie Chaplin and the stunning psychedelic secrets of Cary Grant, the Golden Age was built by titans of talent and charisma. But as we've seen, that genius often came at a steep and sometimes cruel price, paid by those who worked alongside them. This brings us to a timeless question that every film lover must consider. Does knowing the darkness of the artist diminish the brilliance of their art? Can we separate the flawed, difficult, and sometimes monstrous human being from the perfect, immortal characters they gave us on screen? Or does understanding their hidden struggles and cruelties add a new, more complex layer to their work? We truly want to know what you think. Who on this list shocked you the most? Was it the universally beloved Cary Grant, the tragic Judy Garland, or the cruel master of suspense Alfred Hitchcock? Is there another Hollywood tyrant you think we missed? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this look behind the velvet curtain of Hollywood's Golden Age, it would mean the world to us if you hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Be sure to also ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the stories you only thought you knew. We have so many more secrets to share. Join us next time as we investigate the most cursed film productions in Hollywood history, where the on-set drama was even more terrifying than the movie itself. Till then, always remember, in the land of dreams, the brightest stars often cast the darkest shadows.